If you watched trains in the 2000s until the late 2010s on Canadian Pacific trackage like me, you most likely got to see these amazing leasers, the CEFX AC4400s, nicknamed the Bluebirds. In their iconic blue paint with striking white stripes, these have certainly earned their place in railroad history, but in 2019 and 2020, they began to disappear, slowly being replaced by the newer SD70 ACUs, and since then they have never been seen on Class 1s again. And you wonder, what happened to them today? Well, this is your video. First off, let's talk about how these units came to be. There were two types of Bluebirds made, CEFX 1001 to 1025, which were in UP or BNSF specs, and CEFX 1026 to 1059, which were in Canadian Pacific specs. The CEFX UP/BNSF specs were built similar to UP's mini shields such as UP 6430 or BNSF's H2s, for example, BNSF 5600. They were equipped with high-ad trucks to work well with the Powder River Basin coal trains and had a gray underframe to match other UP locomotives. The CEFX Canadian Pacific specs were built similar to their 2002 order, for example, CP 9700. They were made for seasonal surges of traffic on trains such as grain harvest or winter coal demands, which both railroads have their fair share of. These units were also made for railroads to experience firsthand the new revolutionary AC technology without having to buy 50+ new units at once. They continued on their leasing journey, except the UP specs, which were returned by UP and were leased by Canadian Pacific, CN, or other small companies such as the LS&I. But for the Canadian spec leasers, they continued their duties. When in 2017, two of the UP specs were painted into the Central Maine and Quebec scheme, these units were CEFX 1002 and 1006. But following the Canadian Pacific acquisition of the CMQ, they started working with Canadian Pacific again, until 2019 and 2020, when following the success of the SD70 ACU rebuild program, Canadian Pacific had a less of a need for leaser power like these, and following this, the CEFX AC44s gradually began getting sidelined, including the two CEMQ AC4400s. Then in 2023, the CEFX AC4400s were spotted in Albia, Iowa with a new paint scheme which was almost unrecognizable from the original scheme. They were again spotted at Canadian Pacific's yard in Nahant, Iowa, in a line as if Canadian Pacific wanted to lease them again. Many people, including myself, hoped and speculated this. In 2023 and parts of 2024, they were seen moving around on railroads such as BNSF, Ferromex, and UP, when all of a sudden they disappeared again for about a year. Later that year in 2024, photos on pages like ns-9.com showed some of the CEFX AC44s of both types, including the CMQs with NS patches. These units were later confirmed to be set for rebuild into AC44 C6Ms. And then later that year, they were seen being rebuilt and repainted at GE's Erie and Justin facilities into the Horsehead scheme. Strangely though, they never actually entered mainline service, but were being shipped around like this train that had caught in Missouri, which was transiting a few of them to Erie, Pennsylvania. And then towards the end of 2024, they were seen back in primer with FXE markings. NS had sold the units after a traffic slump made them unnecessary to use and maintain. And yet again, they gradually began getting primed and shipped to Mexico to be painted into the new Ferromex Zebra scheme. Some of them continue to stay with NS for unknown reasons. The CEFX AC44s that were now with Ferromex stayed in their primer scheme for a while before all were finally painted by the summer of 2025. But not all CEFX AC44s were gone. Some continued to be stored before being shipped to Galveston, Texas, where they were loaded on a ship to Port Harcourt in Nigeria. Very sad. Very tragic. A very sad ending to the CEFX AC44s, but honestly, it's better than them all being scrapped. But remember how I mentioned that some of the NS CEFX rebuilds were stored in Erie for unknown reasons? As of January 2026, they are going to be entering mainline service. Finally! And luckily, the scheme isn't fully dead, as a handful of the UP specs stay active on railroads such as ArcelorMittal's Cartier Mine Railway in Quebec and the LS&I in Upper Michigan. Today, almost 25 years after these units were built, their scheme is almost extinct, but their legacy and the impact they left on train watching lives on. Thank you for watching and happy January.